Morning friends, back in the shop. Another day working on the 79 FLH. Today is the day we put the carburetor on. Hoping to get the carb on, get the air cleaner on, maybe get these tanks put on, and get this bike on the ground. That way I can go through and decide what I'm doing next. I know I need to go and get fluids in this bike yet, and then I'm pretty close to, checking everything for torque. I know I've changed a lot on this bike. I've went through this bike. I've, ripped off calipers and rotors and all kinds of things. So I need to go back through this thing and check everything for fitment and tightness. I'll have to get the manual out for that to check the torque spec. But the good news is I've got these Tecton torque wrenches that were brand new to me for Christmas last year, and I've never used them. So I'm going to put them to the test and see how they work. But anyway, that's for a later video. Today we're focusing on throttle cables, and I've replaced these. No, they're not brand new. They are used cables, but they're in really good shape. I've gone through, re-oiled them. I've got them put onto the throttle itself. Now I need to go ahead and hook them up onto the carburetor. One of the neat things on these Super B carbs is they have their little guides right here on the side for the cables. And one of the things that you can do to see which one is which, obviously you can follow them, or you can twist the throttle and see which one pulls and which one pushes, because those go in a specific order on the bike. Our smaller end cable is the pull cable, and our larger end cable, see the difference, is the push cable. With these, if I pull the cable all the way out, and I need it to be on the pull side, and I push it through the housing here, and push this wound end into the housing itself, I've got room here to hook it up on the top of this carburetor. I've got enough room to be able to adjust it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this cable into this end, tighten the little set screw down onto that cable, which I'll have to go ahead and tighten with a screwdriver in a second here. Now I've got the pull cable installed. We'll go ahead and do the same thing with the push cable. And I think there's enough room to do both of these. I do have room to adjust the cables in a little further, which will give me all the cable I can get. I'll do that on both of these. So work with the same amount on each side. And with that one, we'll mimic it again. We'll put it back through this little guide here, and then into the hole with the set screw. With that in place, we'll go ahead and twist that down, if I can twist it by hand. I'll actually grab a screwdriver real quick just to get this done right. Now with my screwdriver, I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down onto these cables to set everything in place. I want to make sure that these cables can't slip out. And there is a lock washer on both of these, so that way everything will stay in place. Now we can go ahead and test it with the throttle just to make sure that the carburetor is functioning properly, which it does open and close just like it should. Now it's time to mate the carburetor to the intake itself. And I'm going to actually put a little bit of blue Loctite on these studs here just to keep everything in place and make sure I lock everything together and I don't have any issues going down the road. With these old bikes, you don't want them to vibrate everything loose and lose one of these bolts and have the carb hanging there. Of course, then it'll stop running. So I'm going to put a little Loctite on that, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten everything up. I do have the intake gasket on already, and the studs are sitting in the intake. So now with those in place, I'm going to go ahead and start threading them into the carb body itself, just to get it started. On the top side, I can get to it with the wrench right here. On the bottom side, I'll reach through with the socket and actually tighten everything up. Now with the carb installed, I'm going to go ahead and put the carburetor bracket back in place. That keeps everything rigid from the carb, sagging or bouncing around on the intake. It's one of the features I like a lot about this bike is it actually has the two brackets for the intake. Of course, since I've spilled oil everywhere, I've got oil all over this. I need to go ahead and clean that up a little bit. That way I can get it in place and get ready to put the new intake on. Now that I have the carb mount setting in place, I'm going to take the front plate here and figure out if I can put this on. This is for the intake that I'd like to run, and I'm hoping that this will actually work out really well. I'm trying to give myself a little more room to be able to get into everything on the top of the carburetor, and this is a smaller intake or a smaller air cleaner, and I think it'll work. So I'm going to line up my holes here. I know there's a specific direction that these go, and I should have marked them, but I did not. Now they have the right orientation, I'm going to Loctite these new studs, that way they don't back out. The worst thing to have happen is one of these studs to back out, fly in the intake, and then of course right into the engine. You'll have catastrophic damage immediately. It's definitely not something I want to do. With the three new studs in place, I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down to the carburetor, so that's all secured, and then I'll go ahead and I'll tighten down the bracket itself. I didn't tighten the bracket first because I wanted everything to be able to move in case I needed to adjust. Now I'll go ahead and tighten up the bracket here, that way that's all secure, and then I can put my cover back on this, and then the carburetor is installed. All I have to do now is adjust the actual throttle cable linkage here, and that's a quick and easy process. So let me button this up and then we'll get to that. I did not Loctite any of the hardware on the new air cleaner cover just because I'm not sure if I'm going to run this yet. I do need to get the tanks on, and of course I want to see if I can get into the enricher and whatnot once the tanks are on. I feel like there's enough room here now, but I may not run this one. So I'm going to leave this kind of loose for now, just to have it on and have everything buttoned up. But next I'm going to work on adjusting these cables. So if you notice, when I twist the throttle, there's a lot of play here, and that's what we're going to eliminate in adjusting these cables. You want the throttles to be nice and smooth, no drag, no slop like there is right now. So I want to go ahead and start backing these out and adjusting them as I go, and once I get them to the point of where I like them, I'll go ahead and lock everything in place. What we're doing here is creating tension onto the actual cable itself. We're actually expanding the outer sheathing to pull against the inner cable to create a little bit of tension and take the slack out. Obviously, as you can see, when I'm doing this, all of the lubricant that I put on the cables is now running out. And you can watch the butterfly to see how much that moves. As you tighten this too far, you can see that you're pulling on that butterfly on the carburetor, actually opening that valve inside. So what you do is you kind of adjust it to the point of where it just starts to move, and then you back it off a little bit. At least that's how I've done it. You don't want it to hold open. Right now it's holding open, so that's too much tension. So we'll back this down until it closes. Perfect. Now we'll test that again just to make sure. Still a little too tight. The throttle should snap shut. There's a spring on that butterfly there that holds it closed, and when you twist the throttle, you're holding it open, but when you let go on these newer bikes, it should close. Now on the old Harley Davidsons, you had to physically roll the throttle backwards to get everything to close and decelerate. On the new bikes with the push-pull system, you should twist the throttle and it should close on its own. Of course, you want to check here. There should be a little bit of play. This might be a little too tight, so I'm going to back that down just a little bit. Now that I have everything in place where I like it, the throttle does have a little bit of play before it starts to pick up. And you want to have just that little bit of slack. That way it doesn't hold that butterfly open. And of course you want it to snap back shut once it's at whatever point. And it's doing its job. It's doing exactly what it needs to do. Now that I have them where I want them, there's actually a locking nut on the bottom here. And you're going to go ahead and run this lock nut right up to the adjuster. We'll hold the adjuster in place and we'll go ahead and lock that one in for now. We'll do the same on the other side. You can see I'm twisting that up and holding this adjuster in place. Now before I actually lock these in place, I want to test it again just one more time so you don't have to lock and unlock these. So we'll give it a little pull, make sure there's a little play, and it still is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Now that I have it where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and lock it in place with the 2 3/8 inch wrenches. One of the wrenches will hold the adjuster and the other one will turn on the lock nut to lock them in place. Something else I know I would like to do on this bike is I'd like to route these cables somewhere where they're out of the way. I really don't like them hanging clear out here, so I'm thinking the old cables were zip tied together right here in this place, and I may do the same. That wasn't a bad look. If I would have had cables that were a little bit longer, I actually could have run a cable tie right here to the nacelle that would hold it out of the way, and it shouldn't bind. It's going to bind too much if I do that. It's one thing you got to be careful of with cables is how many turns and twists are in them. If you have a lot, obviously they're going to bind. If I twist these things right up, I can't pull the throttle. So if I hook this here together like it was previously, I should be able to turn the throttle. And now it's sticking a little bit. So I have to be careful with that. And I may have to just adjust in the bottom side here to see if I can get rid of that stickiness. Because I don't want the throttle to stick wide open and then you can't shut the bike down. Somebody will panic and crash. It'd be a bad idea. I don't want that. So right now it's not where it needs to be. So I think I'm going to adjust this just a little bit to see if I can adjust it enough to cable tie these two together and see if I can make that work. So again, we'll get on the adjuster and we'll get on the other side here. We'll break the lock nut free. We'll adjust this down a little bit. Perfect, I have it exactly where I want it. Now I can actually tie these two cables together. I know that's not perfect, but it's the route I'm going to run. So with this, everything's where I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and twist that lock nut back into place. And then I'm going to lock those two together. I'll test it one more time just to make sure that everything's going to play nicely together. And it's exactly how I would want it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and zip tie these two lines together, the brake line and the throttle cable, throttle and handle cables. That way I have everything kind of buttoned up and together. Now that I have the cables tied where I want them, I'm going to test it one more time. Perfect. It's absolutely where I want it to be. Now I think it's time to hang some tanks on this bike. Get a look at everything. See if the carburetor is going to play nicely with the tanks. Get them put in their right homes. And then get a look at this bike and see what it's going to, potentially look like when it's finished. I'm excited to see the tanks on this thing, that's for sure. Got a nice set of beautiful black tanks that are in fantastic shape. And I can't wait to get them on this bike. Well, it's that time. It's time to put tanks on this bike. I've got a set of black ones that I really like that I think match this whole theme here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the right side tank. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to start with this back mount first. So I'm going to put the tank on. I'm going to thread the bolt into the tank just to kind of hold it in place so the tank is up there. And then I'm going to rest that for a second, put the front mount bolt through the front mount here, so that way it's loose but it's in the right spot. I'm just starting this by hand, just to get the threads to start, just enough to kind of hang it in place. Now with this resting here, I'm going to grab the front bolt. I'm going to grab this front ear, and I'm going to slide it through the mounting hole. Now that that's in place, I'm actually going to snug this rear bolt up just a little bit more, just to keep it a little more snug, keep it from flopping around. There's just enough working room to get the head of a wrench in here. I'm just going to slowly guide this into place. And again, I'm not going to go ahead and tighten that all the way down yet because I do want it to move just a little bit. One of the key things I can tell you guys is I'm using the same hardware I had on the old bike. Now, I know that these back bolts have to be a specific length, and if you go any longer than what they are, you run the risk of running it into the tank, and if it runs into the tank, you put a hole in the tank, and of course then you've got a gas leak. So you got to be careful of that. You want to use the same size bolts every time. Now with the right tank semi-mounted, I'm going to go ahead and put the left tank on, and I'm going to repeat the process. I'm actually going to hang it a little bit on the front mount. And then with that same little bit of working room, I'm going to go ahead and put this stud in place. Thread that in by hand, just a little bit. And with that started, I'm going to go ahead and finish up this front mount here. Draw the two tanks together. Try to hold them together. And then put my wash. Now that I've got that started, I've got this one started, now I need to work on this front bottom mount. Everything is still loose, so I'm able to adjust these tanks if I need to. Obviously you don't want to tighten anything down at one point, because if you do, the tanks are separate tanks, they could sit separate heights. You don't want to do that. And you want to be able to get all of the pieces lined up to where you can bolt everything together. So now I'm going to focus on this front lower mount. Now with the front lower mount in place, I'm going to go ahead and adjust these tanks so they're sitting flush here on the back. You can get one higher or one lower, that's a common thing. So there's a little bit of room in these back ears to raise and lower these tanks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them sitting at the same height. I'm going to go ahead and tighten those down first. Now that I've got the inner mounts all snugged down, I'm going to go ahead and snug down the top upper and the bottom lower mount. One of the things I forgot about is the upper vent tube. So what I need to do now is go ahead and remove this center dash. And I pulled the pins or the clips for the speedometer just to get that out of the way. I just need enough room to be able to wiggle this tube through and get it hooked up. So now I'm going to go ahead and loosen these bolts here to get this dash to move out of the way. This side of the tube does not have a hose clamp on it, so I'm going to go ahead and slide the hose clamp over the tube first, and then we'll go ahead and get the tube hooked onto the other side of the tank. So now the upper vent tube is in place. That's one of the things that is commonly forgotten, and obviously on the other set of tanks it didn't have a vent tube at all. So now this one's properly installed. Now I'm ready to bolt the dash back down. So I've left the two bottom bolts in place. I just need to center them onto the mount here. I'm going to start them by hand. Now that I have those started, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down. They do have a locking nut on them, or a locking ring. This actually had a little spacer to raise the dash up, so I want to put that back in place, and I did knock that out of place. There's not a ton of working room in here, so you got to be mindful of what's in there, what could fall out, and obviously I lost that. So now that I've got that sitting in place, I didn't even realize I had dropped it. Now I can tighten it down. And now I'm ready to put the speedometer back on. Alright, with the dash back in place, we'll go ahead and we'll tighten down the upper and lower tank mounts. Got myself my long extension to stay away from the paint here. I'm just going to take my time. Move down to the bottom one and get that one done. Well, that's as far as we can go for today. The tanks are on. They are ready for the next steps. I do need to pick up new fuel line and a new crossover tube for the bottom side. So I'll have to measure that. I'll have to buy the right crossover. And then I'll have to go ahead and measure the fuel line too, so I get the fuel line installed. I do have a fuel filter I'm going to run that's nice. And then mount the seat and then really start fine-tuning this thing. Going over all the things that I've touched to make sure that they have the right fluid in, all the fluids are topped off, that all the bolts are snugged down to torque spec, and that this bike is ready to hit the road. I know I need to put my rear chain on yet, and I do have a chain, so I need to feed that in. I've got a coil cover I want to put on. I need to put a headlight in this thing because this headlight's busted. But yeah, I'm in the home stretch. I mean, it's crazy what this bike looks like right now, having these tanks on, seeing the new fenders on it, and seeing what this looks like. I have to say, I I really like it. I like it a lot, and I'm excited to see this thing done. There's a few things left to do, button up parts and odds and ends and things I need to work on, and I'll get those done. So stay tuned. We'll show you those processes when they come along. Well guys, I appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. I'm grateful for the input that you've given me on this bike and all the insight and the stories about your own bikes. I mean, I've talked to so many folks about different machines that they're restoring or have restored or they've got and whatnot, and that's been fantastic. So I just want to say thank you guys for that. I could talk about motorcycles all day, every day with everybody. I have to say that this is, obviously my passion, and I really love it. But I appreciate you guys sticking around on the video. If you like this video, give it a like. Please give it a thumbs up. I appreciate that too. That helps my algorithm. It helps me to reach more folks and get my videos out further. And of course, if you guys like these videos, share them with your friends. Share them through email or on your social media platforms. I really appreciate that as well. Can't speak today. It's all right. I'm excited. It's easy to be excited when you see things in the home stretch. As always, guys, I appreciate you. We'll catch you next time.